Welcome everybody of the formation session of the Livingstone's Formation Camp 2020, but the ambivalence of violence between destruction and creation in the Bible, the God of violence. And I'm happy to welcome Ricardo Sanjurjo, who is a delegate for the University Pastoral and Professor of New Testament Studies at Santiago de Compostela. He's currently working on his PhD and is the spiritual assistant of the Livingstones community there in Santiago de Compostela, and helps with the coordination of the Livingstones network in Spain and Portugal. And we were thinking about having a personal introduction first of all the participants who are online, and then we are going to have a presentation of Ricardo Sanjurjo in English, and in the questions and answers session after the lecture we can have questions in English, in Spanish, and or in Italian. Ricardo, would you like to start with a prayer?
Okay. Yeah. Let's. I think we could start praying together with a psalm, since it is a biblical formation session. Let's start praying with the Word of God. And if you can look in your Bibles for the Psalm 136. Some of you already have looked for it, but maybe we can start reciting it together with our mics closed, because it's chaos in the meeting. But if someone wants to read it aloud, so you don't have to listen only.
Can you please repeat,
Psalm 1.
Ricardo, because the network connection is a bit poor.
We are going to start praying with Psalm 100. Talks about God, about the love of God, but also talks about violence and some kind of violence. And if someone wants to read it aloud for everybody, it would be a great idea. Just also in the mind about violence in the Bible.
Yeah, Ricardo, the sound is sometimes disrupted. Can you please try to switch off your video so we might have a better bandwidth for your connection? And definitely we would like to ask someone who has an English Bible at hand to read and pray this psalm together. 136. In the other numbering system, it's 135. Is there any one of you who would like to?
Is this Psalm of Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
That begins, praise the Lord for he is good?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I can read the whole thing.
Yes.
Praise the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Praise the God of gods, for his mercy endures forever. Praise the Lord of lords, for his mercy endures forever. Who alone has done great wonders, for his mercy endures forever. Who skillfully made the heavens, for his mercy endures forever. Who spread the earth upon the waters, for his mercy endures forever. Who made the great lights, for his mercy endures forever. The sun to rule the day, for his mercy endures forever. The moon and stars to rule the night, for his mercy endures forever. Who struck down the firstborn of Egypt, for his mercy endures forever. And led Israel from their midst, for his mercy endures forever. Who split in two the Red Sea, for his mercy endures forever. And led Israel through its midst, for his mercy endures forever. But swept Pharaoh and his army into the Red Sea, for his mercy endures forever. Who led the people through the desert, for his mercy endures forever. Who struck down kings, for his mercy endures forever. Slew powerful kings, for his mercy endures forever. Sihon, king of the Amorites, for his mercy endures forever. Og, king of Bashan, for his mercy endures forever. And made their lands a heritage, for his mercy endures forever. A heritage for Israel, his servant, for his mercy endures forever. The Lord remembered us in our lowest state, for his mercy endures forever. Freed us from our foes, for his mercy endures forever. And gives bread to all flesh, for his mercy endures forever. Praise the God of heaven, for his mercy endures forever.
So we started reading this psalm that is okay. It starts like so well. Give thanks to the Lord, praise the Lord, because his mercy endures forever, because he's good, because he did great things. He created heavens and earth. And suddenly it becomes a psalm that thanks God because he has struck down the firstborn of Egypt. He defeated great kings, mighty kings. He slaughtered our enemies. It's a psalm that praises God for his violence, and it's really interesting. See how mercy and love of God are intertwined with this aspect, with violence. I think this subject, the subject of violence in the Bible, is one of the most interesting and compelling and also controversial issues that we can address as Bible readers, as Bible scholars, as Bible, as the people who listens to the Word of God, as Christians, as religious people in the end, not only as Christians. How this book, the good book, has can have this relationship with violence. Why violence is so present in the Bible? Why the God of love, the God that is love, as the Bible says, can be also at times violent.
Ricardo, sorry to interrupt you. Would you like to conduct the introduction now or later?
Yeah, we can. You can do the introductions. Yeah, the introductions now. Yeah.
Okay. So please stop the screen sharing for a while.
Yeah.
So we can see the gallery of participants.
I also here. Yes. Okay, so who wants to begin?
Yes, I propose, because we are many of us, and just to be effective in the time,
Yeah.
I'm making now a screenshot of my view. And in this order, we can make the introduction very briefly. Is there a specific question you would like to ask the people as an introduction, Ricardo? Or just the name and place?
What's our name and what's our name, where we come from, maybe why are we interested in this?
Okay, so let me share now us. One moment.
Okay.
So that can be the order of introduction. Maybe then I'm starting. My name is Andras. I'm from Hungary. I'm in Germany right now. And I'm very interested in this topic because somehow God's mystery is deeply in this, how it is that he is a merciful God and a peaceful God, but at the same time also violent and passionate. And that is also a question for ourselves, because sometimes people identify Christianity with non-violence, but I don't think it is actually true. And so that is the question. And Deborah may continue.
Hi. I'm sorry, my internet broke, so I don't know which questions we are answering for our presentation, but my name is Deborah, I'm from Portugal, and about this workshop, why did I choose it? I think it would be quite interesting because I don't really understand this thing about having a good God, but history of the God's people so violent and with so much suffering and with so much war and pain. So I think it would be interesting to try to understand a bit more.
Thank you, Deborah.
I'm Cecilia from Berlin, and I just learned about this.
So Cecilia comes next, I think.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm from Berlin. I learned about this session for 2 hours ago, so I chose what I could get because I'm a huge fan of the Living Stone movement. I have been one of the first ones maybe years ago with Jean-Paul, and I'm just curious what comes of this very, very interesting topic. So I'm just taking it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Cecilia. Welcome.
Introduced but I'm Ricardo. I'm from Santiago de Compostela, and I'm interested in the other seminar, but okay, I have to give this, so no problem.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Caterina from Livingston's Naples, but I live near Salerno. I'm very interested in this topic, especially in the way we see God in the Old Testament. So let's see. Thank you.
Thank you, Caterina.
Hi, I'm Emanuele from Rome. I'm interested in this because, I mean, I think if our faith is such important in our lives, then if there is something that may seem to us like a contradiction or something we don't deeply understand, I think we have to face it directly and remove any doubts from our minds. And that's it.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Hi, I'm Anca from Pietre Vive Cluj, Romania. I'm interested in this topic, especially because I want to know better God and eventually myself, and I want to understand the conciliation between violence and mercy in God who is one. Thank you.
Thank you, Anka.
Hi to everyone. I'm Marco from Italy, from Bologna in particular, and I choose this meeting for two reasons. The first one, because I like, to deep dive into the Bible, in particular in the Old Testament, and so I was a little bit curious. And second one, because I know very well Ricardo, and I know that he's very, very good teacher.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Habib. I'm from France. I'm interested about this topic because I asked to myself about what does the violence mean. We tell me that it's bad, but I would like to learn about the origin of violence.
Thank you, Habib.
I am Ildikó Katona from Hungary. My question is, how lead us God during the suffering in the Bible too? Thank you.
Thank you, Ildi.
Hi, I'm Luciano from Galatina Pietrovive in Italy, and I'm interested about this theme about the violence in Bible because I read some biblical texts that are very, very violent, and I ask myself why God permit these things, and it's an extra biblical question too, and that's all.
Thank you, Luciano.
So hi, I'm Giuliano from the community of Trieste in Italy, and I would like to know more about this topic because I think there's something deeply both human and divine about violence, and I like the perspective this formation meeting put on topic. So I think that's very nice. So thank you.
Thank you, Giuliano.
Hi, I'm Jakub. I'm originally from Poland and I'm living in Germany now. I've chosen this topic, this workshop, because of the ambivalence, as many have already said, this ambivalence to reconcile the view, the perception of God, who is merciful and at the same time he's violent. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Jakub.
I'm Megan from PhD Chicago, and I chose this topic because I've always been interested in the seeming contradiction between religion and violence, especially in the Old Testament. And it's a question that my non-Catholic friends often ask me, like, how is this possible if you believe in a loving God? So that's why I joined.
Thank you. Welcome, Megan.
I'm Miriam from the community of Trieste in Italy, and I'm interested about this topic because I always ask myself why God is the God of love, but in the same time a violent God. So I would like to understand more. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. We have just skipped Joanna. Are you here, Joanna?
Yes, I'm here. Well, I'm Ioana. I'm from the same group with Anca from Cluj, Cluj from Romania. And I have to admit that I'm very interested in this topic, violence in the Bible, because I want to understand better how God actions in the history of the chosen people.
Thank you. Welcome. Ivana, Eniku.
Hi, my name is Eniku. I'm from Csíkszereda, from Romania, the center part of Romania, Transylvania. I belong to the Hungarian community, so my main language is Hungarian. And I'm interested about this topic because of the ambivalence between the Old Testament and the New Testament, between the violence and love, and maybe the question which I am looking for is that we can build bridges between violence and love, or there are no bridges. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Welcome, Eniku.
Hello, my name is Diane and I'm from Livingstones in Paris, and I'm interested in this topic because I think that I try to, like, we know a lot about the sufferings of Jesus on the cross, but maybe I don't know enough about this topic of violence in all the Bible, so I'm really happy to discover it with you, and thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Diane. Christina. Are you here, Christina? It seems we have lost her. So let's see if there is anybody else who is here and not introduced him or herself yet. Okay, then these are us, and thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm giving back the word to Ricardo. And please, if you don't mind, Ricardo, switch off your video, because sometimes your connection is a bit poor, unfortunately. Now we can't hear you yet.
Sorry, I had the mic off. I already switched to the 4G connection, so it should be better. Yeah. But okay, let me share my screen with you again. And yeah, so as I was saying, and as many you shared just now, talking about this God who is love and violence all in the same sentence, for us Christians it's really difficult. It was difficult also for the Jews, for the Hebrews, but it's because it can be a fertile ground for the, I don't know, the emergence of slogans like Mekan said, no, like religion is the cause of most wars in the world. It's a form of violence itself, that many times the atheist or non-believing friends say these things to us. No, many times the religious versus anti-religious debate becomes one of theodicy. I don't know if you know what theodicy is. It's a part of the philosophy disciplines that is a sort of vindication or accusation of God in front of things as evil, violence, sufferings in the world. So why is there evil? Why is there violence? Why do we suffer? No, these kind of things. If if God exists, why do these things happen? And the Bible is not stranger to this debate. As many of you said also, well, this thing of the Bible and violence, it tends also to flow towards a fallacious distinction between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. So the God of the Old Testament tends to be represented as a cruel dictator, a merciless tyrant, and the God of the New Testament is the ever-loving grandfather who sees no evil. And that argument is almost as old as the church itself. Already in the 2nd century, we had theologians like Marcion that said that it could be not the same God. Of course, it seems to us when we read the Bible that there is a radical distinction between the two testaments. It's not that God is different. It's not even that we Christians are different from the Hebrews, or even that we are better or more perfect than, or more loving than them. There's a lot of factors for this seemingly distinction, no? Cultural factors, historical factors, theological factors. But also it could be simply the fact that from the end of the story, or from the end of history as we are, we can understand better the meaning of the beginnings, no? So this is important. This is really important, the theme, the subject, God and violence, violence and religion. We can fall to the temptation of just selecting the passages of the Bible that we like, the temptation of selecting the God that we like, because God is God. God is not an option. It's not a Mr. Potato. He never changes. We say that he is love, but we experience it also in ourselves, in our lives, in our faith lives, with some kind of violence sometimes. So reading the violent passages of the Bible, both in the Old and the New Testament, as we did this year as Living Stones, this is a sort of complement and commentary and many things that you also had the opportunity to read. And if not, I can send you the PDF of the praying itinerary afterwards. It becomes a challenge to our identity as believers. Why the God of love is sometimes violent? Because it's true, in the Bible seems to be an awful lot of passages that deal with violence, and not only that, it's not only the bad and the ugly characters that use violent means. That would be not a problem if, I don't know, the infidels, the Philistines, or the Babylon people were violent, but also God himself and the people of God, the good ones, are violent. What should we do with that is the question. So what I will talk about here today, it's not so only the result of a scientific and exegetical study of the Bible, although it is too. So, but above all, it's the result of my own personal reflections on this, because I think it affects our concept of God, our concept of human beings, of religion. And the first thing I'd like to do is to reflect on what is violence. This should be, or may be, the first question we should ask ourselves. What do we mean by violence? We all have an idea, more or less common, more or less conventional, more or less clear of what it is. But what is exactly violence, no? We could use the definition that we find on a dictionary, for example, the use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy, but I personally find it completely unsatisfactory. Yes, that's violence, but violence itself, I think, is much more than that. So what I think is violence is not easy. It's not easy, an easy concept to grasp. Trying to come up with a better definition is not such an easy task. We could talk about harm, about damage, about physical, psychological, spiritual damages. We could talk about motivations or means, as the definition earlier said. But along with these objective realities, there are other categories that influence us in the concept that we have of violence and how we identify it and how we understand it. But let's try it. Let's try to take a simple, or I mean, not definition, but description of what we understand as violence. We know that it has to do with the other people, the other things, with what differentiates us from them, with how we relate to them. We know it has to do with how we perceive the reality around us, or our own reality, how we are affected by this reality, how we affect this reality, if when talking about violence, how we affect it negatively, has to do with our limits, our identity. It has to do with the other. An other that can be real, that can also be an idea, be one person, one object, one collective of people, the world itself. This other can even be me. So to put it into words, it's I haven't a clue how to begin to do it, a scientific definition of violence. But this initial reflection lends a few concepts that will be key on the rest of what I'm going to say now. No? What can I say is now is that violence begins with a me and a not me, as something that is not me, or with an us and a them. And it has to do with the void in between this me and not me. To put it with concepts less poetic, let's say it has to do with identity and with relationships and limits. And this concept of limit and the void between one and another, it's important. This should be more or less this definition I just said. So why is there violence in the Bible? So if it is a book about God and we say that God is love, why the violence? Why is there the violence in His book, in the Bible? If it presents us the world as God sees it and He wants it to be and promises it to be, why the road towards that world is paved with violent acts? And why God allows or even uses Himself, He's the agent of violence. The easiest answer to these questions could be to say just, I don't know. It's not that we cannot explain it, but as Paul said, who has known the mind of the Lord? This is Romans 11, chapter 11, verse 13. The truth is that the Bible is not a book on theodicy. At least in the most explicit or superficial levels, it doesn't concern itself with questions such as why is there evil or why is there violence. Yes, this reflection exists in the Bible, but it's in the deeper levels and it requires an interpretation. So at least we can say that it puts on record that we live in a world where violence and evil exist. It's not an ideal world. It's not the world that God wants, but it's the world that we live in. But I'm not paid to say that I don't know. I'm not paid, basically. But so let me try to justify why the Bible seems to contain such overpowering quantity of violence. And I think a good place to begin is quoting the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council, in De Verbum 11. It's the constitution inside the Vatican Council that talks about the revelation, how God reveals himself to his people, to us, to humanity, but also that's why it's the text in the council that talks also about the Bible. And it says that in composing the sacred books, God chose men, and while employed by him, they made use of their powers and abilities, so that with him, acting in them and through them, they, as true authors, consigned to writing everything and only those things which he wanted. So as many times the theologians say, the Bible is the word of God. Yes, that's true, but it's expressed in the words of men. It's a culturally mediated book. That means that the grace of God, the inspiration of the Holy Spirit doesn't change the ways that with which we see reality. The medieval theologists used to say, "Gratia non tollit naturam." No? So in this sense, it reflects the vision of the world that its authors had. Or better, it's narrated, it's written using the categories and the language that its author and the original readers used to interpret the world around them. And which is, or what is this world? What was these categories? So the Bible was written in Palestine. It was written in Babylon during Persian times. It was written in Greece, in Rome. And in these civilizations, violence was the usual means through which assert authority. This picture you're seeing is a depiction of the Pax Romana. So the great project that Augustus had to the whole empire was this paradise of peace. But the means to achieve this Pax Romana were war in the frontiers, war in the limits of the empire, and also maybe or many times we have this prejudice that Greek democracy or Roman democracy were these ideal systems where everybody had its voice, where everybody could speak, take part in decisions. The thing is, the most important figures, both in Greece as in Rome, were the strategoi in Greece, the imperator in Rome. That in our language, those words mean general. They were the leaders of the army, the military leaders. So violence, both subtle, overt, and covert, was the usual way of ruling. Hunting was the hobby of the kings and the noble people, because it was like a recreation of war. War was the summum of politics, especially foreign politics. So we are talking about a book that was written in a cultural medium, in a system level that was in itself violent, where violence was really in the most superficial layers of society. Also, it's important to notice that religion has to do with identity, and if it has to do with identity, it has to do in a way with violence. There's a philosopher, René de Girard, that says that all the religious rituals are in some kind of way a sublimation of the violent experiences of mankind. So he talks about 4 phases. A first phase that would be the crisis, calamity, for example, this sickness we are stricken with, or a drought, or a political conflict, a war, something that disturbs the order within society. So the second phase would be to assign blame to something or somewhat or someone. So it's projected in a group, in an individual. The third is the description of this individual, this group, this something, as the stereotype of the accusation that is put forward. So all the people in blah 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 are, I don't know, cannibals or incestuous or witches. No, I don't know. So we make them scapegoats. It's their fault because they are like this and like this and like that. And the fourth phase would be, the fourth stage would be the killing of the scapegoat, because we take these people away, so gods are in peace with us, and no harm will come more, harm will come no more for us. So it's important to notice how in the religious rituals, in a certain sense, is in itself rooted this deeply violent struggle for identity, this us and them, this and that derives in the end in all our rituals, in sacrifices in the Old Testament, in many religions, but also in our rituals, our own rituality as Christians. The Eucharist is violent, or it has to do with violence. It's a non-violent recreation, yes, but it's the peaceful and symbolic recreation of the most heinous and violent act in history, the killing of God, no, of God-made men, but the killing of God. And in fact, when we talk about the Eucharist, we don't talk about just bread and wine. We talk about torn and broken flesh. We talk about poured out blood. So that in itself, even the language is violent. The language we use to describe our rituality. So religion in itself has something to do in its forms, in its rituality, with violence. And third, and not for this less important, our religious experience is also many times experienced or narrated in terms of violence. Many of the living stones are associated in a sense with the Ignatian spirituality, and Ignatius himself narrates his own experience as an experience of violence. It's normal, he was a soldier himself, so he expressed his whole identity as the soldier of the Christ in military terms. But going back to the Bible, we also find this text, and we read the Psalm 136 before, that express as a war, as something violent, as an affirmation of my own identity, this experience as a battle, because the everlasting love of God is showed through his wonders, and these wonders are none other than the harming and destruction of Egypt and the desert peoples. So for this and other reasons, the violence is almost omnipresent in the Bible, or at least it seems to be. But it's not because the Bible is in itself a violent book, but it's, well, this could be a representation of the meditation of the two flags, for example. No, this, I affirm my identity before these other infidels, these things that are my enemies, and I am with God. This is a battle, no? So I think Bible has to do with violence because Bible has to do with mankind. Is as much as it is a book about God, it is a book about ourselves. And if violence plays such an important role in our existence and in how we enter relationships with others, it also plays a really, really important role in our relationship with the other, with capital O, that is, with God. But why is there violence? Why is there violence in the Bible? Why is there violence at all? That is expressed in a very subtle and very graphic way in the beginning of the book of Genesis, in the beginning of the Bible. The first chapters address violence explicitly in the story of Cain and Abel. But let's step back a little bit because let's look with Adam and Eve and their struggle with their identity, their struggle with their limits, and with what they are, with what they are not. I am referring, of course, to the story of the tree of life and the original sin. You can find it in Genesis 3. Okay, and it's really interesting that this is the first time that human beings are active subjects of what's happening in the story. So in Genesis 1, mankind doesn't appear at all, almost at the very end, and just referred to. In Genesis 2, the creation of Adam and Eve, okay, God speaks some words to Adam, with Adam. Adam says something, but the first time they are the protagonists of the story is Genesis 3, the story of the original sin. And it's a story that explains very much what's going to happen afterwards in the story, and in history. The dilemma with which Adam and Eve are confronted with is the eternal distinction between what I am and what I am not. I am a human, I am not God. It's the dilemma that they have. I am a human, I have my limits. And the void, the space between the me and the not me, is one of the most basic experience of us as individuals. That is why in iconography they cover normally only their genitalia, because they are the parts of our anatomy that express much more our limits and our ability to relate ourselves to others. But let's not talk to it. Let's go to the point, the point of violence and limits. How we do respond to this experience of limitation, of discovering that there is something that limits me, that is not me. So that's where the snake comes in. The snake gives voice to this inner struggle of mankind when facing its limits. The battle with the mistrust of others, the battle with self-doubt, with the need for assertion, our rebellion against our limits. The way in which we react to these almost unavoidable realities that we experience is what is at the ground of the cycle of violence. Trespassing our own limits, trying to fill the void between the me and the not me in such a manner that negates mine identity or the other's identity, is the first violent act of history. It's not the murder of Cain, the murder of Abel by Cain. It's the sin of Adam and Eve, because they are trespassing. They're trying to take over the identity of God, negate God, to assert themselves, and that in itself it's an act of violence. But why, we could ask ourselves, why this inner struggle? Why does the snake do such things? Why does the devil act like that? The truth is that the Bible doesn't answer this question. The Bible says nothing about our motivations or about the motivations of the devil. I like to think that's because there's no rationale for evil or for violence. We can try to justify it. We can try to examine the motivations of concrete acts of violence. But why does violence exist at all? Why do we try to overcome our own limitations in such a way that becomes violent? And I'm showing you a picture of the Joker, not because I am just a nerd, but I think it's the fictional character that better depicts this reality. Because all through the almost 100-year-long history of Batman, we never learned about the origins of the Joker. Almost during these 100 years of publication, yes, there are theories. There are many little collections that try to explain the origin of the Joker. But in the end, it's always said that is one of many possibilities, one of many legends, one of many stories that he wants to tell himself. Because in itself, evil is irrational. Evil has no justification. Evil has no origin. Or maybe because trying to find the origin of evil is a really, really useless task to ask ourselves. We could ask ourselves, why does Cain murder Abel? Okay, because he was envious, because God chose the offering of Abel instead the offering of Cain. But what did God choose the offering of Abel? Or is that the reason enough to murder someone, to kill someone? Where does this distrust of God's free will stem from? We simply don't know. And when we try to find the deepest reason for this kind of acts, normally we only try to justify ourselves, because we find in ourselves that we are not saints, we are not perfect, we are also capable of hurtful things, of evil things. Maybe not murderers, but we are really capable of doing the unimaginable. No? So, for example, Paul in Romans 8 says, okay, I try to do good, but when I try to do good, I end up doing evil, because there's something in me that compels me, or that makes me fail. And this experience of failure, of sin, we all share it many times in our lives. So the thing is, why do we suffer? Why there is this violence? Why? It's one of the most deeply rooted questions of in our existence, and it's one of the most important things to ask ourselves as Christians. The thing is, God doesn't tell us why. The thing is that we suffer. The thing is that the chosen people suffers, and God doesn't tell us why. And this is really, really frustrating. But also it gives, it allows us to think it in a different way. Okay, if God doesn't tell me the answer, maybe it's because it's not important. The thing is that because we suffer, God himself decided to suffer with us. I don't know if you ever experienced, but I've suffered depression in some years ago. And when you try to struggle with depression and you are suffering, a deeply rooted suffering, psychological in this case, there are many people that try to tell you why you are doing this. You don't worry, it's just an illness. But the fact is, you are suffering, and you do not need anybody to tell you why you are suffering. You know it already, some way, intuitive way. But you need someone to go through this struggle with you, and that's what God does with the people that suffers violence all through the Bible. God is a God that goes into slavery with his people in Egypt, that walks with them through the desert, that goes to exile to Babylon. There's this vision of Ezekiel where the presence of God leaves the temple, goes into exile with the rest of his people. And God is a God that dies for us, that suffers for us, that lets himself be killed not only for us, but instead of us. And that is really, really, really important. So going back to the experience of the martyrs, last Monday, we had a meeting with the Bologna community with Marco, and we talked about the meaning of martyrdom for the first Christians. For them, it's also a kind of associating themselves. For us, suffering is a kind of a way to associate ourselves to God, to live the life of God. And that's why it's also fertile in our lives. But it's not an answer. I know it's not a justification. Maybe it's not enough, but it's the only thing that God does for us. And we know that, as Tertullian said, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the new life, of the new Christians, the life of the church. Let's ask the last question. So why is God violent? I would like to begin saying that when we talk about God, normally we tend to project the language and the experience that we use to describe our relationships with one another. So our experience of each other is like our experience of God, and we use the same categories. We use the same language. The analogy is a very important part of our language to speak about God. So, excuse me. So the first thing the first image we project to God is the image of a guardian, of a protector, of the Father in itself was this kind of guardian. That's the first image of the gods all over the different religions. They are the supernatural beings that protect my family or my village or my people. And that's it's not strange to the Bible. God is the guardian, and God does wonders to protect and to liberate and to help his people. But what are these wonders? These wonders are the plagues of Egypt. These wonders are the destruction, the defeating of the peoples in the desert, the destruction of the walls of Jericho. So for the Hebrews, talk about this warrior God that protects us, that guides us through the desert. It's a kind of affirmation in a story that tells me that through my struggles, there's someone that defends myself. It's not so much an historical affirmation. So the walls of Jericho were stricken down because the trumpets of Joshua sound so loud because they were blown with the Spirit of God. But overall, this is the land that the Lord has prepared for us. This is a present from God, that He has made this land habitable for us. He guides us through our life. He gives us a place to live. But this is expressed about through these violent images, through these violent stories, through this violent means language. It's also the image of a God. So when we think about violence and God in the same sentence, we normally think about this idea, the divine punishment. So in the sense, we are thinking of God not only as a guardian, but also as the judge, jury, executioner of violence. And so when we think about divine punishment, we can think about plagues, or we can think about droughts, or we can think about illness, pest that maybe falls upon us, or even war. Because of our evil actions, God is exerting some kind of retribution against us. Because and that's what the prophets many times threatened with, the divine punishment. But in the end, is only trying to, on one hand, try to find a rationale for something that in itself it's random and irrational, as it can be, for example, an illness, and just to take it to our own reality these days. So we try to assign blame for who or where was this virus born. So in the end, there are many voices that, no, this is the earth defending itself, or this is I've heard this, this is a punishment of God because of the Pachamama in the Vatican in October. No, this kind of things. It's a psychological mean to try to find the rationale on our own suffering. But also many times when the prophets talk about punishment, they are in the end putting showing the consequences of our own acts. Many times the punishment of which the prophets speak about, it's only the normal, natural consequences of continuated conduct of evil, or of misdeed, or something like that. And the last dimension, and then we can open the field for questions, is, and I think it's really interesting because especially for us as living stones, and that we are trying to deal this year with this strange relationship between art and violence and religion, and how religious art depicts violence. I think violence this is more a personal intuition than a scientific one, okay? But I think that violence had also something to do with creation. I would go as far as to say that the violence of God, is normally the first step or one step in a long process, in a long way of creation or of recreation. Sometimes this violence is only threatened, is only a threat, as we said, with the divine judgment. The prophets say, please convert or else. Or Jesus, it's better for you to cut your own hand and to enter handless in the kingdom of God than to go with the two hands to hell. No? This kind of threatens to be like a wake-up call to convert oneself and redirect my own life. In fact, sometimes violence is a wake-up call. This is really, I don't know what the last letter of the words doesn't appear. Okay, it's a wake-up call. So it happened in the book of Judges, for example. The book of Judges has a really particular and really repeating way of narrating the events that happen along the story. So Israel has faith in God, so they defeat their enemies. They conquer more or less the most of the land, but when they go through peaceful periods in their history, they turn their backs on God, and then something bad happens. Normally, it's a foreign army that invades the country or slaves the people or something like that. And that violence in itself, it's a wake-up call for Israel to convert. That's, for example, how many times violence is associated with God throughout the Bible. Also, for example, the violence that Cyrus, the king of Persia, did to the Babylonians was some wake-up call for the Israelites to refine themselves as a people, to go back to their own religion. Even Jeremiah interpreted the suffering and the eventual exile of their people as a necessary violence to recreate, to re-wake up the people of God. Sometimes this violence is silent between these quotes. And what I mean about this silent violence, okay, if you open the Bible in the first page, the second verse of the Bible is an expression of violence, second or third. So what God does the first and the second day of creation is dividing, it's separating, it's putting limits where there were no limits. It's a way of creating this void that separates, that negates someone or something, the identity of something, no? So creation in itself has a kind of silent violence. But sometimes this violence that is related with creation, it's more active. So in the Bible, we find 3 different myths, between air quotes, of creation. We have the creation as it is depicted in Genesis 1, the creation as it is depicted in Genesis 2, and the creation as it was depicted in some Babylonian myths, as they were the 2 first stories, but in some Babylonian myths, and it's in some psalms, the 74th psalm, the 103rd psalm, that said that creation was the result of the cosmic battle between God and an evil deity, or the beasts, the Leviathan, the behemoth, no? The dragon in itself. But it can be, or what God does through this violence is to prepare this void to be filled with new things. The thing about violence in itself is that it is destructive, but the Bible also has this ambivalence. Sometimes destruction of what is menacing, destruction of what is the enemy of God, of what is threatening to human life, or to everlasting life, to life in itself. It's necessary to create something new. The first great violent act of God, apart from creation, is the flood. And the flood at the end is, if we abstain, or we don't fixate ourselves too much in the details of the flood, the couples of animals, but we look at the motivations of God, is that God is so fed up with people that he decided to kill them all. And only Noah, it's not boring enough, or not bad enough as to die in this flood. He's chosen not because he is the greatest of men, or the most perfect man, but because he was not as bad as the others. And it's an act of war by God towards humanity, but it's an act of war, an act of violence that allows creation to reset itself, because it was so overpopulated with violence, with evil, that there was no other solution. And at the end of the flood, God hands his bow. We don't not normally realize this, but when the story of the rainbow, according to the Bible, that is at the end of the story of the flood, it's God making a peace treaty with Noah and his family. So a peace treaty between God and mankind, and he is giving out his weapon, his bow. So in this case, violence, it seems the only way that God has as to, in a sense, reset creation, or violence seems the only way to stop violence. And that is a message that maybe permeates many passages of the Bible. Another interesting passage where God himself uses violence is the cleansing of the temple. This is a painting by El Greco, and it's interesting because Jesus, that is the one who said, love thyself as I have loved thee, and these kind of things. And we ask ourselves, in this situation, what would Jesus do? What he could take a whip and start whipping up people, right? But what Jesus is doing in the temple, it's not condemning or accusing someone or doing something that is illegal. It's above all is claiming that space to create the new people of God. He's doing this in the court of the Gentiles, where people of all nations would come to praise God. He's making up the space for them. And it's in itself a violent act. It's like when God separated the waters from under the earth from the waters above the earth, so the skies and the seas, to let there be land. Or when God created light and separated night and day to be an space or an environment where life, in this case spiritual life, can exist. And the last image that for me is really, really, really evoking is that the last thing that that the book of Revelations, the last thing that happens before the arrival of the New Jerusalem, so before the description of the goal that we are called to, the last thing that happens is again a cosmic battle. So new creation is preceded by a cosmic battle. What I wanted to say was that in the end, so that maybe we should not only reflect on God's violence, like trying to blame God for something, but also we should try to think in what comes when the Bible tells us about violence, speaks to us about violence. What comes after? So normally when God uses violence, it has a means. It's only a mean to an end. What's that end? And with God, the end is always life. So as you could say, it's not a really, really deep study that I've proposed to you today, because we could be years talking about this and examining each one of the many passages where God uses violence in the Bible, but some ideas just to evoke some conversations, some feelings in you, and maybe now we can all activate our cameras and our mics and try to have this conversation about this.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for this rich and deep lecture. And now is the time to have some questions. As I said, you may ask questions in English or in Italian or in Spanish.
Even Portuguese.
And also Portuguese. And I would like to ask Ricardo to translate the questions to English before you answer.
Io avrei una domanda, un'osservazione. Mi è piaciuta molto la parte sul diluvio e sulla creazione, e ricordo che nel passaggio del diluvio praticamente è come se quella separazione iniziale tra le acque fosse annullata, perché nel libro, quando si descrive il diluvio, si legge che le acque salgono, quindi quella separazione tra le acque di sopra e le acque di sotto si è annullata, e trovo che quel passaggio sia proprio significativo, perché è come se legasse le due cose tra la creazione e la distruzione contemporaneamente, negando quel limite che esisteva nella creazione tra le acque di sopra e quelle di sotto, invece così è come se quel limite non ci fosse più e quindi c'è il caos, la violenza, la distruzione e poi viene ripristinato quel limite. Non so se sono stata chiara.
So what Katerina said is that in the story of the flood in the Genesis, it's like if the limit, the firmament, the rakiach in Hebrew, was like was annulled, was torn down, and the creation was reset in the end. And it's true. It's true. The waters invade the earth because this barrier, this limit that God put in the second day of creation was torn down, this wall. And it's really important because putting order into chaos, as Katerina has just said, it's in itself an act that requires some kind of violence, because it implies playing between with the order, the identity of things.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. I asked to Ricardo what the origin, because I didn't understand the origin of violence and the link about with the Adam and Eve story.
Okay, it's not that there's anything overtly, openly violent in the story of Adam and Eve. They don't do anything that is really, really, really violent. But what I tried to explain or to say before, it's that if violence has to do with how do we react with our limitations and with our struggles with identity, there's many aspects of the story of Adam and Eve that have to do with these kind of things. So they are presented with their own struggle as mankind, as human beings. They are presented with the fact that we are not almighty or powerful, the fact that we cannot do wherever we like at the time we like, and the fact that we in ourselves are not God, but we are not the other. And the reaction that Eve and Adam have, it's a reaction of mistrust, it's a reaction of as it is expressed by the snake, no? Rebellion, mistrust, and this derives the consequence of this struggle for Adam and Eve is to try to possess the other. In this case, to possess the identity of God, to take over God. And that in itself, even if it's only eating the fruit of the tree, not killing anybody or beating anybody up, it's in itself, so in a sense, in a symbolical sense, from my point of view at least, an act of violence. And it begins a cycle of harm, a cycle of hurt, because that for which the human being was created, that is to conquer the world, to dominate it, that could be also a sort of violent dimension, but to create the world, to dominate it, and to multiply itself. That's the commandment of God during creation. Be fertile, dominate the earth, populated, this life becomes something harmful, hurtful for the human being. You will bear your children with pain. You will suffer while working. So in itself, it becomes violent, this act, not against God, but also against human being. And the motivation then for the Cain and Abel narrative, it stems from this, because what they are doing is they are suffering and then trying to reconcile the suffering in their lives through sacrifice of the fruits of their work, of their labor. So it's not violent, but I think that the origins of violence are deeply rooted in this narrative of Adam and Eve, in this reach to take over something or someone else's identity.
So it is an example than a story.
Yeah. So the stories on the book of Genesis, especially those of the first 11 chapters, are not really historical in themselves, are reflections about humankind, about many aspects of humankind, from where does evil come from to why I speak this broken English and somebody other speaks Japanese, and so where are many different languages. That is the struggle of the Babel Tower, no? The reason or the meaning of the Babel Tower, what they try to explain. And they explain it as stories because as many Hebrew authors said, especially in medieval times, and it's something that is deeply rooted in many cultures. Stories in itself are truer than the truth. So when we try to communicate something that is really deep, and also abstract, something that is not palpable, it's easier to convey it in the form of a story, not in the form of a discourse. We are heirs of the Greek people that thought otherwise many times, but nonetheless, there are many stories that are didactical in itself, not only just a notary that is taking note of what happened that day, because there were no other people in the paradise, in fact.
You? Other questions or comments? Maybe. Then I may have a question. I was thinking about morality, I mean human morality and violence. And of course, we would like to take some kind of good example from God. And that's really great to see that, yes, sometimes violence is necessary to do something good. But always the question is, how we can determine it is right if it is right to act violently, to want some good. And for this, I would show you a poem. Unfortunately, I didn't found it in English. That is a Hungarian poem from Sándor Reményik, and the title is Goodwill. And I just want to translate three short parts. The first is, I wanted some good, but everything went bad or wrong. And an example here, I didn't like or I didn't think a brick in the wall of the church is proper, and I tried to move it, and the whole church has collapsed, and I wanted good. And the last point is, when the final judgment comes, this is goodwill, or wanting good. Will this word be enough for me? So my question is, we all know that even if we want good, the way how we do it is not always morally good, and how we can see this in the light of God's violence. We read it in the Bible, given that we are not God and we don't know the perfect way to do, but sometimes we have to do something.
So I think the criterion is to it's difficult to hear and to understand what God wants us to do in each time of our life, in each moment of our life. So many times even God is counterintuitive. So I think it's going to I think the most interesting criterion to do this kind of discernment it's
We can't hear you, Ricardo, right now.
That was a cliffhanger.
Maybe we can wait a bit to have the connection restored, but that's an interesting point to hear. Yeah, it seems Ricardo has quit, and then yeah, you are here again. Maybe you can try, Ricardo, to switch off the video. We cannot hear you right now because you are muted.
Now?
Yes, yes. The point up to which we heard you is just you said that the most important criterion is, and then the line broke up.
Now I don't hear you now. Sorry, guys.
Yes, we can hear you now. You may go ahead, Ricardo.
A ver, let's try again.
Yes, we can hear you
okay,
now.
what was the point where we...
Yeah, so you said that the most important criterion is...
Cliffhanger!
So I think one of the most important criterions is this criterion of creation in itself. So I don't know how it's translated into English, but the exact test of the the text from Paul. But in the 10th chapter of the first letter to the Corinthians, and also in the 11th, Paul repeats like a motto and slogan to discernment in itself. So what everything I can do everything is legitimate, everything is licit to me, is legal, but not everything helps build the community. Not everything helps build the temple of God that is the church. Not everything helps build the temple of God that is my life. So this is I think for me, it's one of the most important criterion of morality that we can find all throughout the Bible, because it gives me, or gives us, something concrete, something that I can evaluate afterwards. It helps create, because okay, this is not good. Okay, why is it not good? Why is it evil? Or you have to be this way or that other way. Yeah, but why? So this kind of evaluation, this kind of, for me, it's a personal option maybe, but it's one of the most important criteria. It's not, it's also rooted in this dimension of God using violence as a violence between air quotes as a mean to creation in itself.
Thank you.
Maybe share something. It's really a question, but I wanted to share something that I'm probably going to think about today or the next days. When in the end you said that violence is a mean that it's used by God, and that at one point you said like God acted like that because it was his only option. To me, it made me think a lot about it, because for me it's hard to think about a God that has one option. And also because when usually someone or a person has one option, it means that is victim of something. I mean, when people has no other option, I think they are experiencing already violence. In a way, I don't know if it's clear, like I expressed my thought in a clear way, but so this is something that I'm going to think about, and maybe if you can give me some more element to help me going through this thought, it can be useful. Thanks.
Okay, that it's a really, in fact, it's a really profound and deep intuition that from the beginning, God like becomes, in a metaphorical sense, a subject to us. He puts himself right from the beginning at the service and at the mercy of humanity, and he does it even explicitly. No, I am binding myself to you. He not with these literal words, but the fact that he made this alliance, he puts all creation at the feet of mankind. It's in a sense putting himself even at the mercy, metaphorically, of humankind. And yeah, it's really beautiful to think that to think of a God that loved us so much as to do these kind of things. I don't know if anyone else, because this is not only an exegetical or theological question. It's also a deeply spiritual one, and maybe some of you can add to this.
If I may, I think it's very dangerous to say that God has no other option, because it's like, I think when you say that, you are limiting God with the options he he maybe have had or not, but like guessing or trying to say what the intuition of God was or is, I think it's always very on a very sleepy road. Yeah, we can that can lead to some part of playing God, let's say. I don't know, that's my point on that.
I think we could say that it's God's option to have this no other option. So it's okay. It's dangerous to say that God has no options, that He is not all powerful. Because it seems to imply that He is not all powerful or almighty. But He chooses not to do that. He chooses to put Himself at the mercy. And that's in the end what happens with Jesus. He could do whatever He will, but he chose not to do that. And it's also in itself a kind of choice. I agree with you. It's a dangerous way, but it seems like that in our relationships with God, that He chooses not to. He chooses to limit Himself, in a sense, because love is in itself this kind of limitation. Love conquers all, but also it's some kind of limiting, no, in this sense, because I don't know.
But in what way, for example, is God limiting Himself?
So let me think of an example that it's in the Bible. But every time we choose something, we choose between doing something or doing the other something. Every time we make a choice between acting or not acting, it's in a way a kind of limitation, because we are rejecting something. When God binds Himself by a solemn alliance to His people, He is becoming the defender of Israel, for example, against the other peoples, the other nations. And that's that in some kind of sense. It's also a way of talking, a way of saying, but it's in a sense a kind of God limiting Himself. He is the God of Israel above all, and then is the God of all creation. When God puts Himself at the mercy of humankind and lets Himself be killed, He is limiting Himself. He could do other things. He could choose to do other things, but He chooses to, in some kind of sense, limit Himself. Maybe say limiting is really strong use of language, but God chooses to put Himself at the mercy of the men, of humans, not the men.
Maybe the last point. I'm not sure if God limits Himself, or maybe we are limiting God, or maybe our perception of God, of people's perception of God. For example, I don't know, 4,000 years ago, so 6,000 years ago, even now, are distorted, and somehow they were thinking that God is with them and against some other nations. Because for me, also now, probably from a different point of perspective, it's really difficult to say that God would be against some other nation. Also, how God could even in a way to show His power.
Yeah, the language which we use to talk about God is always human language, and is in itself limited. Our perception of God is in itself distorted, because we cannot see it all. We cannot see as and we can think of this, I don't know, for example, as the episodes of the appearances of the resorted Jesus. Okay, so when we think up, for example, the gospel last Sunday, Emmaus, what Cleophas and the other disciple that we don't know about are talking about is perfectly reasonable. We are binding God to our laws, to our perceptions. We are thinking that God should do this or that because we always thought as Jews that the Messiah would be blah, 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 no? And don't you know, you stranger that appears to us in the middle of the way, that this is what the Messiahs should have been. And God, Jesus, opens these new limits for them. So we as humans, as theologians, as Christians, we always have to have this caution in our language. We use very descriptive language, we use very strong language sometimes, but we recognize that our language, our perception is limited, that we just see a teeny tiny part of what God is. So yes, maybe we are limiting him, but it seems to us, or at least in our experience, it seems to us that God is binding or letting himself be limited by us.
Okay, thank you.
We have a couple of minutes left, so you may have a few more questions.
Maybe I have, I don't know, maybe not a question, but if I understand right, you were talking about that violence of God is a step in creation or recreation. And I'm thinking about something concrete which can be connected to our daily life, like stepping out from our comfort zone is like a step of creation, maybe a violent one, because we have to do something which is not so comfortable, it's not so certain, but to create or to exist, we need that wake up call or something which helps us. I don't know, maybe I'm forcing this connection, but you can add something to this.
Okay, I think it's yeah. So normally to create, we need to make way for this something new. So not everything is compatible with these new things, and this sometimes leads to violent situations and to the need to destroy or to change or to affect something in a way that could be described as violent. So when I read, for example, these passages where Jesus, that 2 chapters before, had said, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth," in the Beatitudes. So 2 chapters after, he says, "Think not that I am coming to the earth to bring peace. I am going to bring not peace by the sword." And when I think about these kind of sayings of Jesus, or as this warlike language that Paul uses, so the last enemy to be defeated will be death, or even John in all his spirituality uses this violent language many times when he talks, for example, about the defeating of the prince of this world. I think of this like that. So to create something new, many times we have to clean the slate and to make way of the new. And yeah, sometimes to create this space so the new things can be born, it leads to violent situations. And many times when God uses violence in the Bible, the next thing is something that has to do with reconciliation, recreation, new beginnings, something like that, new life in the end.
Thank you. We may have time for one or at most two more questions.
If I could add, do you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
To what Maria said about the fact that God has the only option, that he is limited in what he can do. Maybe it's also because he gave us all the liberty that we had, so we are totally free to listen to him or to listen to his voice in our heart or not. And maybe the violence is the only option, because by the sufferings that we go through, it enables our heart to hear him, to listen to him a little bit more. Yes, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Maria.
No, I had nothing to add. I was just thinking.
Okay. The very last question or comment. Who?
I want to say something. For me, what you brought up is took me came into my mind the conversion of Paul, because he was denying God. He wasn't having space God to work in Paul. So it was an act of violence from God to Paul in order to create space to enter a relationship. Because for me, violence is denying the other, and the most powerful violence is denying God. So in order for God to reach to us, in individual or large, in all mankind, I think that he had to create space through violence.
Thank you. I've never thought of the conversion of Paul like this. Normally when we thought about the conversion of Paul, the violent is Paul. He's breathing threats of death threats against the Christians. But yeah, in a sense, God uses violence against Paul also. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and comments. And I'm asking Ricardo if you would like to say something as a last remark, or shall we just close this session?
No, I would just like to thank you for your attention. I know that maybe in some parts of the exposition maybe were a little chaotic, but thank you for your patience. Sorry for my not so great English in some times of the exposition, and okay, that's. Thank you for your contributions also during the conversation, the question and answer part. Thank you.
Thank you again, everybody. And I'm closing this session now. And just to remind you that the sharing groups start in half an hour. So have a nice afternoon and see you later. Bye-bye.